and welcome to Cataclysm Magazine. We can be found on the web at www.cataclysm.com. My name is Jason JROCK Houston, and we're speaking to Ace Trump, and we're going to be talking to Ace about, he's got a podcast called Louder with Ace. And Ace, why don't we start, before we get into the podcast, I understand you were previously a manager for like Thin Lizzy and Uriah Heap, so you want to talk a little bit about how you first got into the music business?
Sure.
And some of the other bands?
It all started about 30-odd years ago, and I actually started off more doing what you're doing. I was a music journalist.
Oh, wow.
And I did that for many years, and then I decided to take it professional and ended up moving from nowhere town in Canada down to Los Angeles to be part of the music teams down here.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of the end for me.
So what was the first band you actually got an opportunity to, either go on the road or manage?
The first band that my business partner Adam and I ever managed was the 80s supergroup Asia.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, we took them on in about 2003 and steered them through the making of one of their better later albums called Silent Nation.
Okay.
And we worked with them for a number of years, and that kind of started the ball rolling.
And so how long were you, because I understand, like I said, I believe Thin Lizzy, Uriah Heap, Europe, the band Europe. How did you get the opportunity to do all that? Was it all at the same time or different times?
Different times. Adam and I have always been very hands-on managers. We go out there, we're with the bands when they're doing stuff. Right now we look after about 14 acts.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of them, it comes very organically. Like, for example, we were on the road with Thin Lizzy at one point, and we were doing a bunch of festivals in Germany, and on the bill was also Europe. And that happened to be at that time they were looking for new management. They were very impressed with what we had done with Thin Lizzy at that point.
Oh, wow.
And more or less approached us about becoming their managers.
So I'm assuming the time you worked with Thin Lizzy was after Phil Lynott had passed and Scott Gorham was carrying it on?
Yeah, we started managing them in 2010, and we've been doing it now for 12 years. So.
And what's that like? I mean, that's extra hard. You're working with a legendary band like Thin Lizzy, but like I said, at that point, Phil Lynott has passed on. Scott Gorham is carrying it on with new members. The fact that I guess so many people are a fan of Thin Lizzy, and those songs mean so much to different people. It's kind of a soundtrack of their lives. The fact that you're able to kind of carry on with new members and be successful, that speaks volumes.
Indeed. It's all about having a plan and following through. And so, when we reassembled this, we went to Scott and said, look, we should try and get as many original members as possible. Mm-hmm. And so we approached Brian Downey, and he was up for it. And obviously Phil has passed on. We approached Brian Robertson as well, but he was just not in a state to be able to tour at that time. Yeah. So we had to find the other members of the band, so we needed somebody on bass. Now, Marco Mendoza at the time, he had been playing bass with Thin Lizzy since the 90s.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And so he was a natural choice. And then we had to find that other guitar player that Scott was going to play with. And it happened to be at the time that Scott was working Universal over in England, was doing remasters and reissues of a couple of the most popular Thin Lizzy records, Jailbreak and the live album, Alive and Dangerous.
Oh, of course.
And Joe Elliott from Def Leppard was working on it with him, and they were working out of Joe's studio in his home in Dublin, Ireland. Yeah, and one night after the sessions, they were sitting around talking, and Scott confided in Joe and said, "Look, Ace and Adam, they're looking for. We're trying to pick a guitar player to play in Thin Lizzy," and without hesitation, Joe said, "Your man is Vivian Campbell." Def Leppard's taking the next year off. Yeah. It would be his lifelong dream to be guitar player in Thin Lizzy, so that was an easy call.
And was that the lineup when they had also Tom Hamilton touring with the band?
That came later. What happened was Marco, eventually Thin Lizzy evolved into a band
Black
called
Star Riders.
Yeah. And Marco was part of that, but then he decided to leave after the first record cycle and join the band The Dead Daisies.
Of course, yeah.
So So at that point, Thin Lizzy was kind of put on the back burner to focus on Black Star Riders. But then to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Jailbreak, we did some shows, and we didn't have a bass player.
Wow.
And we didn't have a drummer either, because Brian Downey had more or less retired from touring at that point.
Yes. Yeah.
But at first we had Mickey D from Motorhead, because Lemmy had passed away
of course.
Not long before then, and Mickey is a big Thin Lizzy fan, so he'd agreed to do it. And then we were desperate to try and find a bass player. I talked to so many players that I knew from over the years. I talked to Jason Newsted, I talked to Nikki Sixx,
wow.
I talked to a bunch of these players, and they were all honored to be asked, but they had other things that they had committed to.
Yeah.
And it was actually one conversation I had with Mickey one day where I said, if you can think of somebody, let me know. And he said, well, I'm not going to think of anybody you wouldn't think of. And he called me back a few minutes later and he said, did you ever consider Tom Hamilton? And I said, like Aerosmith Tom Hamilton?
Yeah, wow.
He said, yeah. And I said, do you know him? Because I certainly don't. He goes, oh yeah, he used to come with his family to the Motorhead shows all the time. And I said, you know him well enough to call him and ask him?
Oh, wow.
He said, sure.
Wow.
So he phoned him up and he called me back a few minutes later and says, Tom's in.
Yeah, and besides...
Here's an interesting fact just before we go on past that.
Sure.
Thin Lizzy is the only band that Tom has ever played in other than Aerosmith.
Isn't that amazing? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing that's amazing is, you think initially, how the hell can you replace somebody like, a great frontman like Phil Lynott? And then briefly, they had, for a number of years, John Sykes fronting the band. Were you at all involved during that time?
Yeah, we were at the tail end of that. In fact, it was a big bust-up between the band and John Sykes that caused this revamp that we did that eventually was so successful.
Yeah.
And, but of course we had to fill the role of the vocalist. And when John Sykes was in the band, he'd really dragged the band in a metal direction.
Oh, okay.
Much more metal, and it had really affected the audience in a negative way. And so the one thing we knew when we were looking for a new singer is that we didn't want another metal guy.
Yeah.
And we were working on some of the preliminary stuff for it, and we were talking to Alan Parker, if you know who he is. He's a fairly famous British journalist and filmmaker.
Okay.
And we were sitting around having drinks with him one night, and he suggested, have you ever thought about Ricky Warwick? And we went, you mean the guy who sings for the Almighty? I told you we don't want another metal guy. He said, no. He does this singer-songwriter thing. He's the perfect guy. And so we went and saw, we went on different nights, but Adam went and saw him once, and I went and saw him once, and we were both blown away, and the rest is, as they say, history.
Yeah, that's my point, because, I had the opportunity about a year or so ago when he put out his last solo album, interviewing Ricky. Super talented, super nice guy. And it's amazing because, off the bat, you wouldn't think, oh yeah, that's the guy who could front Thin Lizzy from the guy from Almighty. But then he's capable of doing everything. And I think more than anything, like you just kind of spoke about, he seems to have be the greatest frontman in the sense that he's got that respect of, okay, this is a legacy thing. I got to kind of respect what came before, not go in there and try to change the sound of Thin Lizzy,
You nailed it on the head there. He gets asked in interviews all the time, how does it feel to fill Lynott shoes? Yeah. And he says, I've never thought about filling Lynott shoes. I mean, you couldn't. He says, I'm just happy to stand beside
sing the songs.
Those shoes.
Yeah. And you mentioned Marco Mendoza was previously with Thin Lizzy, and he went on to the Dead Daisies, and he was such a powerhouse talent that when he left the Dead Daisies, I mean, Glenn Hughes, who's a new singer in that, he actually filled the role of both Corabi and Mendoza.
I know. But, Marco is one of the most talented musicians I've ever worked with.
Yeah.
And he's also a genuinely wonderful human being as well. I was sad to see him leave, but he is a machine when it comes to working. That guy is not happy unless he's on a stage.
I mean, he also, previously was with like Ted Nugent, Whitesnake. He put out a great solo album a couple of years back where he does not just the bass playing, but he does the vocals. Super talented guy.
He's an amazingly talented guy. Yeah, he's worked with Neil Sean, and he was in Journey for a while last year or earlier this year, and covering for their missing bass player. And yeah, he's just amazingly talented. That guy is just unbelievable.
And do you ever pinch yourself, Ace? Like you said, you started out as a journalist, and you moved your way up in the rock world, working with these bands behind the scenes. You ever kind of think like, oh wow, I grew up listening to this band, and now I'm working with these guys, carrying on the band.
I'll tell you something. I grew up in a little nowhere town in the middle of Alberta, Canada.
Okay, yeah.
We never got gigs. We never got anything, but music was always a massive passion to me. And I would never in my wildest dreams would think that somewhere down the road I would be listening to these guys that were such a big part of my life and actually helping shape their careers. I pinched myself. I got the greatest job in the world.
And of course, most of the Lizzy fans, of course, know that Phil Lynott has passed on. But do you find oftentimes that, because they're one of those legacy bands, that a lot of times people, just because they love the music, they go and see the band live when they have a chance to. A lot of times it doesn't even matter really who's in the band, just because they love the music that much.
It's definitely a celebration of their music, and that's what it's all about. We're out there playing this incredible body of music that Phil penned in his lifetime, and he was an amazing poet, he was an amazing musician, and his music deserves to be celebrated.
Yeah. So, and on that front, the closest thing I kind of ever experienced that I can kind of equivalent that to is when Ronnie James Dio passed away. Some of his surviving band members, they had this thing called the Dio Disciples, and they did it with Tim Owens and Oni Logan, and I tell you, it was like in a House of Blues in Anaheim, California, and I never seen anything like this. I mean, the fans were, it was like for the love of Ronnie that night. And of course the musicians that he played with, they of course were making a living as they should, but I tell you, everybody was up on their feet. It was like electric churches, you know what I mean?
Ronnie was a very good friend of mine and of my business partner Adam. I worked a great deal with the Heaven and Hell project that they had.
Oh, okay.
And he was one of the most genuinely lovely people, and if anybody's music deserves to be celebrated, it's certainly Ronnie Dio.
Oh yeah, and as you know from being in the music business, there's a reason they call it the music business. I mean, Heaven and Hell, that was kind of a joke to me, because I'm like, I know they couldn't call it legally Black Sabbath, but I'm like, come on, we all know it's Black Sabbath.
Well, I don't think it was a legal thing, because I think Tony is the one who owns the name. They just wanted to make a clear distinction between what they were doing and don't want to sell it in because of course they had rebuilt Sabbath into a going concern.
Sure.
So you don't really want to stir the pot. Way, as it were.
Yeah, I got you. And the last thing I want to ask you regarding Thin Lizzy is, I mean, the other thing is, as much as they're loved and respected, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I just do not understand. They keep getting it so wrong. I mean, they've been up a number of times, but I don't know how you can not induct them.
It's a frustrating thing. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in general is a frustrating entity to deal with. Thin Lizzy has a problem in the United States, and of course, that problem is that not many people know the band, but they know their music. Every time somebody finds out that I'm a band manager, the first question they ask is, "Oh, who do you manage?" And Thin Lizzy's definitely one of the bands I come up with, and they'll look at me with a strange look going, "No, never heard of them." And I say, "Boys Are Back in Town," "Jailbreak." "Oh, I know those songs."
And how many people know Whiskey in the Jar because Metallica covered it?
Oh my God, I'll tell you a funny little story. We were on tour in Germany once, headlining tour, and I was in the catering office doing some work on my computer, and the guy who was catering was so excited the band was playing, so he ran outside to go watch a few songs. And after a few tracks, he came back upstairs, and he was livid. And he was throwing pots around and everything, and I said, "What's wrong?" And he goes, "I don't understand. With a repertoire of songs as great as Thin Lizzy, why do they feel the need to do a Metallica cover?"
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I said, "Oh, my."
And then, before we get into the podcast, I'd like to ask you a little bit about how you got to manage Europe, or what was that like? Because, I mean, they've got some great songs to me. They're I don't think people really appreciate Europe for the great band that they are. And the unique thing about Europe is because of that song, The Final Countdown, I mean, they always have a gig every New Year's Eve, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, that song is a two-edged sword for that band. Everybody knows it. It's certainly a big song, but it is not at all indicative of what that band's music is like.
Yeah.
Europe is a guitar-orientated hard rock band, and that is their music.
Yeah.
And if you go explore like the last 4 records they've done.
Oh, sure.
They've done some of their best work ever, and it doesn't get recognized just because when people hear Europe, they want to hear The Final Countdown.
And they think that's the only album they ever put out, and you're so right. I think if people would check out the later albums, and I got to give them credit because they could go out as Europe and play like The Final Countdown or their greatest hits in its entirety, and not have to put out any new music. They could live on that. But I love the bands that continue to put out new music.
Well, I think it's important not just for the fans who want to hear new music from these bands, but it's important for the bands themselves because they are creative entities, and if they're not creating, then really why are they in this game?
Yeah. So true. And then the other thing you kind of mentioned about Thin Lizzy, I guess the last question I'll ask you regarding Thin Lizzy is as much of a legacy band and as much as people love Thin Lizzy, I've also kind of noticed that I don't know if it's from being a European band, but like they do more touring in Europe than they do in America. Is that just because that's where they can sell more show tickets or what?
No, actually, it has a lot more to do with the U.S. government and their policies about how they deal with bands that come in. It is such... the United States is so xenophobic when it comes to outside bands coming in. I'll give you an example.
Sure.
If I have a U.S. band that's going to go to the U.K. and tour, literally the night before they fly, I can go on to the equivalent of the British Customs website, enter the proper information on their website, pay a $35 or £35 fee, and ta-da, we have our work permit. In the United States, you have to hire a lawyer, and it costs about $12,000 to just get the paperwork filed to get a work permit to come into this country. Unless you're doing a significant tour with decent money, you just can't afford to come here.
Oh wow, that's amazing. And now let's talk a little bit about the podcast and how long have you been doing that?
Well, the podcast was born out of the pandemic. While the pandemic was wreaking havoc in the live music industry, we had a lot less to do around here, and I have a very good friend named Mark Nicholas who is a filmmaker and works on one of the big studio lots here in LA.
Yeah.
And one day he phoned me up and asked me to come hang out with him, and we did, and he got to talk to me. He said, with all those great stories you have about being on the road with the bands and all that stuff, it would make a fantastic podcast.
Oh, sure.
Do it for fun.
Yeah.
So my assistant Sean and I, we started doing these shows, and we were doing it for our own entertainment. But what we started finding is that we were starting to make actual impact on people.
Oh, sure.
We were pulling the curtain back and showing what's actually going on behind the scenes, and giving advice to new bands about what they should and shouldn't do, and trying to explain some of these complex musical things that were going on in the media so that the average person could understand.
Yeah.
Like right now, we just did a facelift on the whole thing, and we're calling it Louder with Ace. And the first episode we have up right now, I got the opportunity to sit down with two of the key lawmakers in the UK who were involved with dealing with the live music industry, and basically put it to them, said, look, we've just come off of 2 years of COVID. We've got Brexit that's wreaking havoc in the touring industry. We have the war in the Ukraine that's causing the fuel prices to go through the roof.
Yeah. What
is the UK government doing to help? And so, we had an hour-long conversation, and it really puts it into context that I think the average person can grasp what the challenges are and what's being done about it.
Oh, wow. And, so tell people where they can find the podcast if they're interested.
Well, if you go to the website, which is louderwithace.com, you can get links to anything there. We're also on YouTube, and it's the channel is at louderwithace. Facebook, we're at facebook.com/louderwithace.
Okay.
All those sorts of places.
We'll send people there. Now, let me ask you, like, is each episode kind of different in the sense, like, somebody might tune in and talk about something like that, or maybe you'll be interviewing somebody one day? Just kind of depends.
Yeah, well, like, for example, we don't restrict ourselves to just things like that. Like, with the next episode that'll be released, it was an interview with a fellow named Ron Chaney. Now, Ron Chaney is the grandson of Lon Chaney Jr.
Oh, wow.
I've been a horror movie fan since I was a kid.
Oh, yeah. Who is it? Yeah.
And this is the grandson of one of the guys who helped form modern horror with the Universal Monsters. I mean, he was the Wolfman.
Those are the classics, and and not to interrupt you, but I have this other show I do, and it's related to like classic movies and TV shows and just pop culture and everything like that. And we did a special like on the original Frankenstein and Dracula, and it's amazing, that going back to 1931, those movies are like 90 years old.
I know, and they still hold up. I mean, you watch them now. I mean, they don't have the kind of special effects we're used to these days.
Yeah.
But they still hold up. And another show that's coming up. We just filmed it today, as a matter of fact. My assistant Sean and I were both big horror fans, and I managed the band The Murder Dolls. If you're familiar.
Oh yeah, Joey Jordison, and all those guys. Yeah.
And now AC Slade, who's the guitar player in that band, is a very dear friend of mine and a fellow horror film fanatic. So we sat down today and we just did a podcast about what our favorite horror films were.
Oh wow!
So
yeah, and those classic Universal films. I mean, I watched some of those recently, and what's amazing is as primitive, because you got to realize back in 1931 when they made some of these movies for the first time, they were like some of the first movies, and so technology was very primitive, if you know what I mean. But yeah, you see like I noticed, I think it was Frankenstein or Dracula. They had the credits roll, and of course it's all in black and white. Before the start of the film instead of at the end, and just little things like that. Yeah,
I mean, and then when you talk about how they managed to pull things off like that, getting to talk to Ron and hearing the stories that his grandfather told him about the actual filming of those things and what they did and how they got around certain problems and everything, it's fascinating to hear those stories. I mean, his great grandfather Lon Chaney, who played Phantom of the Opera and Hunchback of Notre Dame, was called the Man of 1,000 Faces because he was a makeup expert and could change his look in every film that he did. It was, and this is before we had special effects. This guy was sitting there with his tackle box full of glues and makeup and stuff, and just making it happen.
Oh yeah. I mean, a lot of that stuff was just kind of on the spot, and it's Man of 1,000 Faces. Interestingly enough, I didn't know that was also the name of Gene Simmons' management company he used to have.
That's right. Well, that's where he stole it from.
Yeah. And speaking of being a horror fan, I got to ask, have you seen the recent Rob Zombie's version of The Munsters, and what do you think of that?
I thought it was horrible.
I mean, I was expecting more. I don't know why, but
I hated every minute of it. I was so disappointed because I was so looking forward to it. I really wanted to like it.
Yeah.
And I thought it was abysmal. I mean, visually, it was stunning. Like, I really liked the things that he did with the lighting and things like that, but the story was so... I mean, when you get to the end of a movie and realize that whole story was completely unnecessary...
I mean, I get that they're trying to tell the origin of it, so they're trying to tell how they met, but, having the Munsters without Eddie or even Marilyn is kind of goofy, and then kind of a cutesy little... I got you, babe moment. Okay, it's cute and everything, but
No, not for me.
yeah. But
I was always more of an Addams Family guy anyway.
yeah. And from what I understand, like he had originally kind of wanted to stick, he wanted it to be black and white. But I guess the problem is when you get hired to do a movie like that, you got to do what the studio tells you to do, and they wanted to kind of make it more modern. Which I think anytime you do that, you're really messing with, a classic, if you know what I mean.
Well, but on the other hand, look at the movies they did of the Addams Family, and they were genius.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, it's just, I think that the problem lay completely in the story. It was just not a good story, and it wasn't worthy of what Rob is capable of doing. I mean, he's done some brilliant films. He's done some clunkers too, but I was expecting a whole lot more from this one.
And so, besides the podcast, are you still managing bands?
Oh yeah, that's my main thing. The podcast was born out of just
boredom,
having a lot of fun and stuff like that, and we really just enjoyed doing it. But it's now taking on a life of its own. And so we use it as a platform to try and institute change in a positive way for the music industry.
I mean, so a guy that's been in the music business as long as you have, Ace, one thing you probably noticed, I mean, working with type of bands, like you mentioned, Thin Lizzy in Europe, and I think I was reading even we're working with Uriah Heap at one point, is that correct?
Oh, we still manage Uriah Heap.
Oh, yeah, I just got, the publicist just sent me a little thing up that they're getting ready to release a new album, so why don't you talk a little bit about...
We just released the first single yesterday.
And how's that been going?
The response to the new album's been incredible. We did a really neat video, and the song is called "Save Me Tonight." It was written by the bass player in the band, Dave Rimmer, and he co-wrote it with Jeff Scott Soto.
Oh, okay. Wow. And I know who Jeff Scott Soto. Now, Uriah Heap. Has it been a while since they've released any new music, or talk a little bit about that?
No, the last album came out 3 years ago. It was called Living the Dream. It was very successful, and we toured the world for a couple of years behind it. Well, they've been continuing since 1970. They've been pretty much putting albums out on a regular basis, and we just are in the middle of 2020 was their 50th anniversary.
Oh, wow.
We were going to do a big 50th anniversary tour, but of course COVID had different plans. So we're staging that now. They're about halfway through it. It starts again tomorrow, I think, in Germany somewhere.
And of course, being from Europe and being a European band, I know they're probably huge there, but any plans to bring that to the United States?
We've actually done several tours of the United States over the last few years.
Well, I guess
the last one we did was just before the pandemic. They toured all of North America with opening for Judas Priest.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And again, Uriah Heap, being somebody that's been around as long as I have, of course, I've heard the band's name. I know who they are. But does it ever annoy you that, when you guys do go out on tour or do come here in America, a lot of times people are like, you get the response maybe, "Oh, I didn't even know the band was still around," or...
I get that a lot, but you know what happens when they see the band play and see how incredibly good they are? They're always walk away with a smile on their face.
And I think what's cool about, again, I got the press release from the publicist, and another friend of mine, he just happened to email me just coincidentally, not even knowing I was going to talk to you today. He was like, "Oh, have you heard of the new Uriah Heap? It kicks ass." And a lot of times, I know Blue Oyster Cult, a couple years back, they put out their first album in 20 years, and they just killed it, and people are just still loving it. And so when you guys go on tour, how hard is it for the band to come up with a set list? You got to put in the classics, of course, but then how much new material do you include in the live set?
Well, the thing is that usually, with Uriah Heap, the last several albums have been so strong that they do appear quite a bit in the set. This 50th anniversary tour we've been doing, they've been playing 3 hours a night to try and get as many of the big songs from the last 50 years in. But when they start the album's called Chaos in Color, and it comes out January of next year, and when they start touring behind it, they will probably play, I would say, between 3 and 4 songs from the new record.
Oh, okay, cool.
On the tour. Yeah, because they get very well received. I mean, when we did Living the Dream, we did 4 or 5 songs from that one, and the fans loved them. So.
Wow. And so, I guess managing all these great legendary bands that you get to work with, I mean, it's a lot easier in the sense that, do you find if you were to take up, say, an up-and-coming band that's not as known, and you're trying to help that band get a record deal, I mean, the music business isn't like it used to be. I mean, for most bands to even have a record deal, it's like, what do you mean a record deal?
Well, what it comes down to is this business is all about who you know.
Yeah.
And the reputation you have. And over the last 20 plus years, Adam and I have built a reputation that we know what we're doing.
Yeah.
So I do have some younger bands on my roster, like take for example Tax the Heat, which is a British band that we took on about 5 or 6 years ago, and we've been involved with them since their creation. And we basically went to some of the record labels that we have relationships with and said, look, we really believe in these guys, listen to it and see if you hear what we hear. And they did, and they believe in us as much as they believe in the band, and they know that if we're behind the rudder, that the ship's going to go in the right direction. We just announced another incredible new band that I think is going to make a big impact. It's called Elegant Weapons.
Oh wow!
And this is
yes. Wow.
That Richie Faulkner from Judas Priest has formed.
Oh wow!
And the album was recorded with Scott Travis from Priest on drums, Rex Brown from Pantera on bass, and Ronnie Romero from Rainbow and Michael Schenker Group is doing the vocals. But they're going to be doing a lot of touring next year, and the album comes out in April. And I've heard it. I live with it every day, and it's an incredible record. And literally, I took that to my friend Monty Connor over at Nuclear Blast, and he heard it once, and he said, "Let's make a deal." He just knew that this was something he wanted. So.
Also, Chip sent me the press release on that. Let me ask you, like right off the bat, you get a press release in your inbox about a project like that. Oh, Ronnie Romero, Scott Travis, Ronnie, and the other guys, Rex Brown. Right off the bat, a lot of people. Oh yeah, we want to get involved with this band, but. Talk a little bit about that, because you get all these kind of like a super group, I guess you would call it, and then.
Okay, well, basically the first thing I'll say is it's definitely not a project. This is a living, breathing band, and it's not something they're just doing on the side.
That's good to hear. Yeah.
Let's be honest. I mean, when you're the one unescapable truth about working with heritage bands like I do is that these guys aren't spring chickens.
Yeah.
They're not going to be touring forever again, but you take a band like Priest, where you have Richie, who is considerably younger than most of his bandmates, and wants to be doing music for the rest of his life. And he is very active in the creation of Priest material and all that. He's written a lot of stuff over the last several albums, but he had a very distinct idea about doing this album, Elegant Weapons. And he just basically, Scott lives in they both live in the Nashville area, so it was a natural to call on him to play drums.
Uh-huh.
He and Rex Brown have been friends forever, and, they've always just helped each other out whenever they needed it. And then when we needed a vocalist, we looked around, and Adam and I had done some shows with Thin Lizzy with Rainbow in Germany a couple of years back.
Wow.
And heard Ronnie singing, and we just went, that guy's amazing. If he's available, we should tap him to do this. And this incredible batch of songs, and Andy Sneap from Judas Priest produced the record, and the end result was just so gobsmackingly good that when Richie approached me about representing it, I said, I'm in. This is amazing. I can't wait to see what this does to the music world.
Wow, yeah. I mean, I think just on its surface, it seems like it's going to set the rock world on fire. I mean, just when I got that in my inbox, I can't tell you how excited it was to read about this exciting new band featuring all these, all-stars. But I'll tell you, talking a little bit more about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I'm at least happy they let Scott Travis get in. I mean, he's been in the band at least 30 years, but they're like, no, Richie doesn't get in. He's only been in the band for 10 years or whatever, 10 or 11 years.
Well, so what you're dealing with here is, what I was talking about before.
Yeah.
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame has its issues, and I don't agree with many of their decisions.
Yeah. We'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
I think that Richie should have been inducted.
Me too.
Here's a guy who has been the lead guitar player for this band for more than a decade, and he has written like Firepower, their last record, which in my opinion is one of the best Priest albums ever. Richie wrote a great deal of that record, and the fact that he's snubbed by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on this level, I think, is just abysmal.
And I would just say, he's the ultimate one of the ultimate rock and roll warriors in the sense that, you joke about he's the youngest member of Judas Priest, and you wouldn't think he'd be the one that just suffered a heart attack, and yet he's still out there touring. He's still out there. I guess he recovered, thank God, but he's still out there creating new music. So you gotta love him for that.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, Ace, as you can tell, I'm another person that I could talk to anyone about music for hours, but I know you're busy. But if you could hold on for a minute, I'd like to talk to you off air.
Oh, sure.
Chaotic Riffs Magazine.